Good morning, friends. In today's session, we are going to have a look at imagery in a play Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. First, we'll go through the moon imagery with four separate plots and four sets of characters. A Midsummer Night's Dream risks fragmentation. Yet Shakespeare has managed to create a unified play through repetition of common themes such as love, and through cohesive use of imagery. Shining throughout the play, the moon is one of the primary vehicles of unity. In her consistency, the moon is an apt figure of the ever changing, varied modes of love represented in the drama. As an image, the moon lights the way for all four groups of characters. The play opens with Theseus and Hippolyta planning their wedding festives under a moon, slowly changing into her new phase. Too slowly for Theseus, like a dowager preventing him from gaining his fortune. The old moon is a crone who keeps Theseus from the bounty of his wedding day. Theseus implicitly invokes Hecate, the moon in her dark phase, the ruler of the underworld associated with magic, mysticism, even death. This dark aspect of the moon will guide the lovers as they venture outside of the safe boundaries of Athens and into the dangerous, unpredictable world of the forest. In this same scene, Hippolyta invokes a very different phase of the moon. Rather than the dark moon mourned by Theseus, Hippolyta imagines the moon moving quickly into her new phase, like a silver bow bent in heaven. From stepmother, the moon is transformed in the course of few lines into the image of fruitful union contained in the silver bow, an implicit reference also to Cupid's arrow, which draws lovers together. Utilizing the imagery of the silver bow, Hippolyta invokes Diana, the virgin huntress who is the guardian spirit of the adolescent moon. In this guise, the moon is the patroness of all young lovers, fresh and innocent, just beginning their journey through life. This new, slender moon, through though won't last, instead, like life itself, she will move into her full maturity, into a ripe, fertile state, just as the marriages of the young lovers will grow eventually, resulting in children. Later in the same act, the moon alters once again, returning to her role as Diana, the chaste goddess of the hunt. Theseus declares that if Hermia does not marry Demetrius as her father wishes, she will live a barren life, chanting faint hymns to the cold, fruitless moon. Hermia has until the next new moon to make her decision. So the new moon becomes both a symbol of Theseus and Hippolyta's happy union and of Hermia's potential withered life as a nun or even a corpse if she does not comply with her father's whim. In a play that celebrates love, marriage, and fertility, the chaste moon is not a welcome image. Therefore, Theseus urges Hermia to marry Demetrius, her father's choice of a husband, rather than spending a barren life in a convent. By the end of the scene, the moon presents herself in another guise as Phoebe, the queen of moonlit forest. In this role, her silver visage will both light and conceal the flight of Lysander and Hermia as they seek a happy and productive life away from the severe authority of Athens. As the play progresses, the moon will continue her transformations, accompanying all of the characters through their magical sojourns. Guiding Theseus and Hippolyta as they prepare for their wedding, the moon also shines over the quarreling Oberon and Titania, who seek a way to patch up their failing marriage. As Oberon says when he first sees Titania, They are ill made by moonlight. Notice how the fairy world is directly connected with the cycles of the moon. As governess of the floods, the moon, which is pale in anger because of Titania and Oberon's argument, has indirectly caused numerous human illnesses. And Titania invokes a weaker, more passive, and watery moon that weeps along with the flowers at any violated chastity. One, on a more comical level, moonshine is also relevant to the players as they prepare the performance of Pyramus and Thisbe, which is also drenched in moonlight. They wonder how they will manage to represent the moon. Bottom has a brilliant idea of leaving a window open during the performance so that the moon can shine in. Quincy doesn't like the potential dangers of this natural solution. What if it's an overcast night, and suggests instead that one of the actors personify moonshine by wearing a brush of thorns and carrying a lantern. Thus, Robin Starveling appears in the final act of the play as the man in the moon, showing Shakespeare's dexterity in playing with all of the natural representations that collage around a single image, dexterity in playing with all of the cultural representation of collage around a single image, from slender, virgin huntress to full, ripe mother to dark, mysterious crone to comical man in the moon. Shakespeare presents the moon in its full complexity. Most of Shakespeare's images have similarly multiple layers of significance. Their relevance changes with their context, so no image maps simplistically onto a single meaning. Despite the multivalent meanings of the moon in this play, it is still a vehicle for unity, shining on all four groups of characters as they transform themselves in the course of the drama. Drenched in moonlight, this drama is aligned with Hecate's mystical underworld visions, with the chaste huntress Dinah, and with Phoebe's rich fertility. But it is also aligned with the more comical, folkloric image of the man in the moon, who, in the guise of the Robin, Starveling the tailor, lights the action of Pyramus and Thisbe. Part of Shakespeare's skill as a playwright was in skillfully representing all aspects of a potent cultural icon without destroying the unity of his carefully wrought artistic creation. This is all about the moon imagery. Now we'll have love imagery. We'll have the look at the love imagery. Exciting and new, or even tedious and worn out, love in all its variations is presented in A Midsummer Night's Dream. But what is love? What causes us to fall in love? How does love relate to the world of law and reason? These questions are broached in all their complexity in Shakespeare's Midsummer Dream. Love is the primary concern of the play, which begins as Theseus and Hippolyta prepare for their upcoming wedding. But the picture painted of love is not necessarily romantic. Instead, the play shows the arbitrariness of desire along with its depth, the sighs and tears that often make lovers miserable. As Lysander tells Hermia, the course of true love never did run smooth. Often swift, short, and brief, love is besieged by class differences, by age differences, by war, by death, and by sickness. Helena's love is plagued by a different demon, indifference. The more ardently she loves Demetrius, the more thoroughly he hates her. And there seems to be no reason for his disdain. She is as beautiful as Hermia, as wealthy, as similar to Hermia as double cherries on a single stem. Helena's meditations present love in its guise as the childish, blindfolded Cupid, a constantly repeated image in this dream, who playfully transforms the vile into something pure and dignified. The image of blind Cupid is repeated when Titania falls in love with Bottom, the ass. Oberon's love potion works much as Cupid's arrows are reputed to do, by impairing vision. The juice charms Titania's sight, so she is unable to see her lover for what he really is. Love's arbitrary, irrational nature is the subject of one of Theseus' speeches. In Act 5, he famously creates a connection between the imaginations of lovers, lunatics, and poets. All three see beyond the limitation of cool reason, and all are beset by fantasies. While the lunatic's imagination makes heaven into a hell, the lover shapes beauty in the ugliest face. The poet, meanwhile, creates entire worlds from the airy nothing of imagination. In Theseus' In Theseus' opinion, all of these fantasies lack the stamp of truth. Does this mean Theseus' love for Hippolyta is equally spacious? The Duke would probably say no, without reasons or evidence to back up his claim, but his comments lead us deeper into the question of what constitutes love. If his love for Hippolyta is based on seemingly clear vision, what has caused him to fall in love with her rather than with someone else? A deep understanding of her personality, a reverence for her compassion or her kindness. The play doesn't tell us, but its all overall logic suggests a loud no, a loud no to both questions. In this drama, love is based entirely upon looks, upon attractiveness, or upon the love potion that charms the eyes. Thus, for example, Hermia accounts for Lysander's surprising loss of affection by assessing her height. She is shorter and therefore less appealing than Helena. Like too many teenage girls in contemporary society, Hermia is plagued by doubts about her desirability. It's not surprising that body image is such a vexing issue in Western society when love is so often based on appearance rather than essence. Even when love is mutual and seemingly based in clear vision, it is often hampered by family disapproval. For Lysander and Hermia, love is marred by her father's desire for her to marry Demetrius. The law is on Aegeus' side. All of the relationships in the play, but this one is particular, emphasize the conflict of love and law. The ancient privilege of Athens allows Aegeus to dispose of his daughter as he wishes. She is his property, so he can estate her to anyone. His words show the violence that often supports law and points out a discord within the seeming concord of love. According to Theseus' edict, Hermia needs to fit her fancies to her father's will, suggesting that Hermia's love needs to be combated by her father's authority, otherwise, the law of Athens will sacrifice her on the pyre of reason. Yet, as noted earlier, her father's choice of Demetrius seems as fanciful and arbitrary as Hermia's choice of Lysander. Although Theseus is less willing than Theseus is to condemn Hermia to death or to celibacy. Theseus is guilty of linking violence and love. He wooed Hippolyta with a sword and won her love by doing her injuries. Although Hippolyta seems subdued, even passive in the play, the violence that led to their love in a constant presence. This play's representation of love is not the saccharine view presented in many modern love ballads. Instead, Shakespeare returns us to our animal natures, displaying the primitive, bestial, and often violent side of human desire. As Bottom astutely notes, reason and love keep little company with one another. The characters in this drama attempt to find a way to understand the workings of love in a rational way, yet their failures emphasize the difficulty of this endeavor. Shakespeare seems to suggest that a love potion, even though seemingly crazy, is a better way to explain the mysterious workings of sexual attraction than a common sense. Love and reason will never be friends, nor will nor will love ever be controllable addiction? What fools mortals be, Puck what fools mortals be, but go on stating that, and perhaps we are fools for entering into the dangerous, unpredictable world of lover, yet what fun would life be without it? This is all about the imagery, love, from the play A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. Thank you.